just going to the summation, Rav Moshe states as follows about the Yisachar Zvulun partnership. Hayotze mikol zeh lefi ma shebiarti barach inyan Yisachar Zvulun uvetam hadar ledina. So he concludes with like 8 or 9 points. She'ein ze prat b'mitzvah tzedakah ela b'mitzvah Talmud Torah. This is not an aspect of tzedakah. This is part under the rubric of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah to enter into a Yisachar Zvulun relationship. Shelachein gam scharo me Hashem yisbarach eino mischar de mitzvah tzedakah ela mitzvah Talmud Torah. If a person does enter into such a relationship, he is not rewarded as a giver of charity, but rather as a studier of Torah. Even though I didn't study Torah, but I gave money to someone who did study Torah, I get rewarded for that Torah study. Number 2, b'chol mitzvahs haTorah, keshe'echad gorem shechaveru yaseh mitzvah, with all other Torah mitzvos, when one person causes another person to do a mitzvah, ein lo chelek b'schar hamitzvah, she'Hashem yisborach nosein l'makayim hamitzvah. He says, with all other mitzvos, like if I help you do a chesed, I facilitate your ability to put on tefillin, or something to that effect, I don't get the schar of putting on tefillin because I helped you put on tefillin, right? Ella kol haschar di'ika l'kiyam mitzvah hahi hu la makayim. Normally, the mitzvah of putting on tefillin is rewarded to the person who put on tefillin. It doesn't go to the person who facilitated. Like if I'm a sofer and I sell you a pair of tefillin, or let's say a person is disabled and I help them wrap their tefillin. I get a reward for enabling another person to do a mitzvah, but I don't get the reward for doing the mitzvah itself. Okay, v'zeh shegaram shechaver yasa ha-mitzvah, yesh lo schar al maisav udvarav shegar mushu schar miyuchad. But I get a separate reward, which is to help another person do a mitzvah. Uvelimad haTorah hi kifi mashmashma ipcha. But with Torah study, it's just the contrary. To the contrary, he says that sheyesh lo mechz schar shahaya nosein Hashem yisbarach lelomed haTorah levado im haya gam misparnes ba'atzmo. That I get half the reward of the person who's studying the Torah. Had that person sustained himself on his own, and you would look at the net reward of that person's Torah study, I get half of it. Dekevin sheparnasaso hal yisa yedei acher, kahad di yisachar sha'asak b'torah v'nisparnes al yedei zebulun, yesh lo lezvulun mechz schar dahayanitein lisacher. So Zvulun gets half the reward for removing the need for Yisachar to work. And Zvulun doesn't get any additional reward for causing another Jew to learn Torah. He literally gets the reward for Torah study. Kain mashma aliba the Rashbi. So he quotes all of the people that seem to say that. That's point number 2. Now, so far, these are conceptual points. There's no halacha l'maisa here. Point number 1 is it's not under the rubric of the mitzvah of tzedakah, it's under the rubric of Talmud Torah. Number 2, I don't get rewarded as an enabler of a mitzvah. I get rewarded as having done the mitzvah of Talmud Torah myself. Okay, number 3, she'ika pratim lazeh. There are details. Prat echad ika barashi v'harabenu Yerucham shetzarich zvulun lahasnos techilim yisachar shehu zvulun yasok b'malacha u'pragmatya chudoma v'yisachar yasok b'torah. Number 3 is that this is a halachic issue, that the two parties have to make some kind of contract among themselves, whether oral or written, but it has to be a detailed contract to basically specify that Yisachar will learn, Zvulun will go into business, and they will divide everything 50-50. Bein haschar gashmi de ba'olam hazeh sheik al yidei Zvulun b'chol ma sheyatzlicheu Hashem yisbarach. And that's true whether we're talking about the physical reward or the physical benefits that Zvulun gets from his business practice. Bein haschar sheika me'Hashem yisbarach liyisachar al ki mitzvos limud Torah. Whether we're talking about the spiritual benefits that Yisachar gets through his Torah study. Shu achilas peruseim umagna umatzla b'olam hazeh v'ikar haschar gadol sheish liyisachar b'olam haba gam kein shava b'shava. And as Moshe had said, there are two aspects to the reward of Talmud Torah. One is in olam hazeh, as we say in our Birkas HaTorah, Elu devarim she'adam ochel peruseim ba'olam hazeh v'hakeren kayemes lo le'olam haba. He gets both reward in this world and in the next world for Talmud Torah. The Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Okay. Okay. So you basically Zavulun will get, based on that contract, will get half of everything. Number 4. Duhu davka shava b'shava v'lo toloi kefi sheyitratzeh. Now this is Rav Moshe's Chiddush, and this is where we saw him quoted in that Sefer Hilchos Tzedakah that we're learning. Some say that it doesn't have to be a 50-50 partnership. Some say that as long as I, Zavulun, I run a multi-million-dollar business, and so I'm only going to give my Yisachar partner $100,000 a year to support him. I'm not going to give him half of everything that I earn, half of all the profits in the business. So there is one shita that says that is considered a Yisachar Zavulun partnership, but according to Rav Moshe, that's not the way the partnership works. It's everything is divided 50-50. You're reflecting on what we said yesterday about when Yisachar has holdings. Yeah. So it all depends on the partnership. But Rav Moshe is talking about the simple situation where Yisachar has no business, he's just learning. And Zavulun is the one with the business. So according to Rav Moshe, if you want this to be a true Yisachar Zavulun relationship, then the business is 50% to Yisachar. Yisachar's Torah study is 50% to Zavulun. Sha'afim nisratza Yisachar ha'osik b'Torah litain l'Zvulun ha'osik b'inyani ha'parnasa. She'Yaakov la'atzmo yoser mimachs Yisachar she'yatzlichei Hashem yisbarach b'meshos l'parnasa eino klum. Even if Yisachar is willing to take less than 50%, it doesn't work. In other words, the only way the Yisachar Zavulun partnership will actually accrue to Zavulun's account half of Yisachar's Torah study, both in this world and in the next, is if Zavulun makes Yisachar an equal partner in his business. Okay, that's the way he learns it works. Elatzarach shatnaye davka al shutfus demechza shil Zavulun b'aslachas Hashem yisbarach v'mashiasuk b'malacha prakmatya efsher. He says that I'm sorry, I skipped a line. And so it would also won't work, says Rav Moshe. Let's say Zvulun says, I'll give you $100,000 a year. And Yisachar, you don't have to give me 50% of your Torah study. I'll be happy with 25%. So he says that also doesn't work. Why? He says, V'atam depachos mechatzi aschar gashmi shil Zvulun b'atzlachas Hashem yisbarach b'mashiyasok b'malachu parakmatya efsher. He says, because you can't give less than 50% of the business to Yisachar. Why? He says because then it's a denigration of the Torah study. The Torah study is infinitely valuable. It's worth much more than the multi-million-dollar business. So based on that, if I tell Yisachar, I'm going to give you $100,000 and I want 25%, you're taking too much of Yisachar's Torah study. In other words, the only way this will work will be a 50-50. And also people are not going to want to do like Zvulun says if they negotiate for less than 50% of Yisachar's Torah study. Point number 5. V'leka chiluk bein keshaha'osek binyani parnasa ume'elu shemarvichim harbe ubein elu she'ein marvichim kolkach. He says, furthermore, Yisachar, who's the guy who's sitting and learning, has no right to say to Zvulun, you got to give me more. I can't live off of what you're giving me. Because if it's truly a 50-50 partnership, what if Zvulin's business doesn't do well that year? And he only makes, let's say, $80,000 in profits from his business. He's got to give 40 net. So he's got to give 40 to Yisachar, and he keeps 40 for himself. And Yisachar says to him, I can't live off of 40 grand a year. What is this? You got to give me more. He says, no. Even if Zvulun is a wealthy man, because he has a lot of savings, but if the partnership is in the business, and by the way, I could conceive of this happening. Let's say a person has multiple businesses, and he starts up a business. He goes into the widget business, but he's got multiple holdings in real estate and all that, and he's a wheeler and dealer, and he does the market and everything. And he starts this business, and he says, you know what, I want this business to be matzliach, so I'm going to create a partnership with the Yisachar, and I'm going to make a situation where I'm going to set up the business. I'm going to tell Yisachar, your parnas is going to come from this business, this LP, right? And that'll be your parnasa. Yisachar can't later say to Zvulun, I can't live. No, we had a contract. You're a 50% partner in this particular business. He says that, and so kishaosin shut v'zeim zeh ha'osek v'torah she'eich shehu chavi mechz l'mechz shnei advarim lo pachas v'lo yoser. It's literally a 50-50 partnership, not more and not less. And therefore, if Yisachar enters into this contract, then he only gets 40 grand that year because the business didn't do well. Zvulun is still entitled to half of the schar of his Torah study, and Yisachar can't negotiate it down or ask other people to enter into the Yisachar Zvulun relationship. Well, we don't find that Yisachar is allowed to give up all of his reward for Torah study. In other words, what you're asking is let him take on a second partner. So he'll give half of his Torah study reward to Zvulun, and he'll give his other half to Gad, let's say, right? He has nothing for himself. No, so if Moshe said it, it's only half and half. You can't give less than half of your Torah study. So it sounds like Rav Moshe only allows one partner for this. Yeah, well, that's you're assuming that anyone who wants to go learn in Kollel is well read and literate on how to make a. Look, it happens all the time, even in regular business, where you enter into partnership with someone and he says, well, based on my forecast, on my calculation, we should be yielding. After year 3, we should be clearing $500,000 in profits a year. Well, of course, it doesn't always work out that way. Point number 6. Shelo shayach laso shutfa zeh ela k'sheyisachar halomei Torah yihya b'menucha al yedei zeh. He says you can only make this partnership when Yisachar, through his Torah study, is going to have respite from any other kinds of distractions. Mishum sha'al pi hateva shayach shezvulun yarviach lefi parnasa shneim kistam hotzas inshi b'makom hahu. It has to be reasonably assumed that Zvulun is going to be able to clear the necessary income in his business to provide Yisachar with all of his needs. Zvulun eno atzel elativa otav heim tiviyut stam inshi shem zrizim lemalachtam. That in order for this partnership to remain intact, Zvulun has to be an industrious person and not a lazy bum. V'gam sheyiyah Zvulun ishneman v'lo yitzarach leilech imo ledina v'dayna. And that Zvulun also is an honest person and is not going to try and evade what he's obligated to do. And it's not going to be necessary for Yisachar to have to take him to a din Torah. And in this way, by entering into a partnership with a reliable, honest, industrious person, Yisachar will be able to sit and learn without any burden. But it has to be within reason of what is the reasonable expectations. Lo b'tive osav lizrizus v'lo kishronosav lahavin b'malachu b'pragmatya echlasak b'malasok. He says, but if Zvulun is a stranger to Yisachar, and Zvulun is an unknown person, he comes into the base medrash one day and he says, you Yisachar, I hear that you're the top guy in the base medrash. I want to support you in a Yisachar Zvulun relationship. Yisachar doesn't know this guy from Adam, but he's a smooth talker. And we have no idea whether he can deliver the goods that he says he's going to deliver. We have no idea whether he knows about business at all. And we don't know if he's even honest. And Yisachar, therefore, has no security that he's going to, in other words, there has to be some aspect of security that is provided to Yisachar that the money is going to be in the bank. Yeah, that's right. That's right. In other words, both Yisachar and Zebulun have to do their due diligence, is what Rav Moshe is saying. Yisachar has to do his due diligence that Zebulun will provide him with menuchas hanefesh, that he's not going to have to worry about whether the money is going to be in the bank this month. Okay? Lo shayach lasos imo shutvas. And if not, you're not allowed to make the shutvas. Avol mistaver shemisha osek b'torah. But once Yisachar himself says, I know this guy, I trust him, and so forth, so then you can rely on Yisachar's statement, and you can allow Yisachar to enter into that deal. In other words, Yisachar, you've done your due diligence, you know who this guy is, you trust him, you feel confident, fine, so go ahead and do it. Point number 7. Shalosh shayach laso shutvazu al zaman katzar, delo yiyah lomed atar b'menucha al yedei zeh. This cannot be a short-term agreement, because in that way Yisachar is not going to have menuchas hanefesh, knowing that it's only for a year, and after the year's over, I'm going to have to look for something new. Ela al zaman aruch sheyeh b'menucha l'chol hapachos b'soch hazman shehisnu. But it has to be for a long-term partnership, so that during that period of time, Yisachar will have menuchas hanefesh. What? So let's see if he says, I don't know. V'gam shezman hamenucha aruch maspik shebizman zehu roi lihitchakem batorah. And you have to, this amount of time has to allow Yisachar to deepen his knowledge and wisdom. Daham mistaver sharak b'shvil mitzvos yischakmus b'torah ika inyan hashutvos. And as Rav Moshe says, the whole basis for Zevulun being able to take half the reward is because he is helping Yisachar become a wiser, more knowledgeable Talmid Chacham. Mashaleka b'chol hamitzvos, because that's the reason why this is unique. This is like a unique kind of halachic scenario where I get the reward for your doing a mitzvah. It's not that just I'm getting a reward for you doing a mitzvah. I'm getting rewarded for helping to transform you into a completely different person through your Torah study. Before, you didn't have the mastery over certain areas of Torah knowledge. Through my financial support, you now have become someone who is, let's say, a Dayan, knows Orach Chaim, knows Yoredeya, knows Choshen Mishpat, knows Even HaEzer. You're extremely knowledgeable. I get that reward of having helped transform you into a different person. Mishum delaruba deruba deinchi hu kimat davar she'efsher sheyasku b'parnasa b'chol tzarchem v'yelem efsharos b'ma'at zman sheyuchlu lilmod liyitzchakem u'liyizgadol b'torah. He says, and that's the reason why Zevulun gets the reward, because otherwise Yisachar would not have been able to transform himself into that person, because it's very uncommon. It's extremely rare and uncommon for a person to work part-time and to learn part-time and to be able to cultivate that level of knowledge and to become so transformed. V'gam mitzvahs yidiyas haTorah sheyiskayim galim al yedei shnayim k'uvda d'yisachar zvulun. So transforming an individual into a great Torah scholar is something that can be divided among two people. It's almost like Zvulun is helping build a project. He's helping build Yisachar into a Torah scholar. Yeah, he is. And therefore, it has to be for a certain amount of time that will enable Yisachar to have that transformation. Okay, and therefore, so what would you say? 3 years, 5 years? Can't be less than that. In other words, it's got to be a reasonable amount of time, just like a university education. It's at least 4 years. You've got to give that Yisachar guy the time that he needs in order to develop into a true world-class Torah scholar. Really? 20,000 hours. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Well, for me, it's like 25 years, the rabbinate. Okay. Uchafi shamashma biksuvas daf samach beis hu lo pachos mishalosham. So Moshe says it's not less than 3 years. The Hamar of Ada bar Ahava Amar Rav da Talmidim yotzim leTalmud Torah shelo b'rishus beis v'gimel shamim. He says that Talmidei Chachamim, the Gemara says, can go study Torah without receiving permission from his wife for 2 to 3 years. He says 1 year is insufficient. Zvulun wrote, so she ruchatzi schar mimashe yisachar nischakim b'Torah, ish lahatzrich sheyazman lo pachos megimel mibeis v'gimel shanim. He says, and that therefore it's true here. It's got to be at least 2 to 3 years. Ach mikol makam keben shalom atzinu b'ferish efshesh l'neshusas b'schar sheyachatzi schar lo zvulun al shanasim lo chatzi schar al shanana mishayach. However, because this is not explicit, and I'm just inferring it from a Gemara, I'm prepared to say that you could also say a year would be sufficient also if a person, let's say, doesn't have enough of financial commitment he can make to commit to more than 1 year. Me'achar dekvar nischakim harbe af b'meshach shana v'limet haTorah kvar nechshavet zalad kedei kach shalachar tomashani yisachar yishtadel limtzol mishi yismoch b'yadu shuchal lilmod al harbe shon nischakim ma'od ad shel yachashuv l'shema yaniach mililma mishvil parnasasa. In other words, Zvulun could rest assured that if I guarantee to support you for a year, maybe you, Yisachar, will be able to find another Zvulun for the following year. So therefore, Rav Moshe is willing to admit that even a year could be done, provided that Zvulun can make a calculus that Yisachar will find someone else down the road. Avol be'etzem ein likvo b'zeh davar barer me'achar sheyoser hu mistaver lilmod misham v'tzarch sheyashut v'slo pachas megimel shanim v'zeh shir apachas shematzinu. But Rav Moshe then equivocates and says, but I'm more inclined to say that it's got to be a minimum of 3 years. Va'afta amru shtayim v'shalosh shanim hu b'nei shachar shekvar. Okay, he goes into this. He says, but certainly less than a year for sure would not work. All right, so he says, my inclination is to say minimum of 3 years, but if a Zvulun doesn't have the wherewithal to commit, then it's got to be at least a year. Okay, point number 8. Point number 8, shetzarech laso shutva zudavke im echad hamachshav limud haTorah biyoser. This partnership should only be entered with a Zvulun who has a very great regard for Torah study. Shekadai lo lamol bishvil chashivas halimud kol yamav, k'mo she'osek b'Torah lomid kol yamav. That you need to find a Zvulun who is willing to work hard for the sake of Torah study for his entire career. And just like the Yisachar is willing to commit himself for his entire career to Torah study, you need a Zvulun who's willing to commit his entire career to Torah study. Avalim eino chashuv lo kol kach limud haTorah, ach osu ze b'tziruf ahavasa l'Yisachar ha'osek b'Torah. But if Zvulun's motivation is not because he loves Torah study, but rather because he loves Yisachar, it's his brother-in-law, and he wants to help him out, or it's one of his children, lo mitzad shehu chacham b'Torah, ela mitam achar shehu shcheno krovu chadoma. And he wants to support Yisachar, not because he sees in Yisachar a great Torah scholar, because he feels, listen, my son-in-law, thank God, he loves my daughter. He treats her well. He's not the brightest, he's not the sharpest tack in the drawer, but he's a sweetheart. Let me support him and let me give him a parnasa. Whatever he does in Kolel, maybe he'll learn, maybe he won't learn, but at least I know that as long as I'm supporting him, my daughter will have a good life. He says, Lo nechshav zvulun kolomei Torah. Then Zvulun cannot take the schar of Talmud Torah for that. In other words, it's a nice mitzvah. You're supporting your son-in-law, but that's not a Yisachar Zvulun relationship. Okay, eladavka kishaosa Zvulun ashutzas mishum shuhu rotza l'kayim mitzvahs limud Torah v'haya osa shutz v'sugamim talmud chacham acher. Umasha bocher lasas shutz Yisachar zeshu provo shcheno abovo ukiven to gam shcheno uprovo ovo rotza b'zel l'cheno osa ma'ashutvas v'adai shaper hu osa v'yelo chatzias Torah. He says, if Zvulun would have done this with another person who is a great Torah scholar, then he can do it with Yisachar, his son-in-law. But if he's only doing it because it's his son-in-law and he wants to give his daughter a good life, that's not a Yisachar Zvulun relationship. And therefore, this partnership will not work with a wealthy father-in-law who is not himself a Torah scholar and doesn't have that great of a regard for Torah study.